basic understanding of the economics of Hollywood suggests that for a movie to get a sequel, then it needs to perform at least decently well at the box office, right? After all, what possible sense is there in a studio green-lighting a second film when nobody turned up for the first? That just isn't how money gets made, and it isn't how smart producers operate. To here with flop movies that somehow got sequels. Death on the Nile. Though the first entry into Kenneth Branagh's big-screen Poirot franchise, 2017's Murder on the Orient Express, grossed an impressive $358.2 million against a sensible $55 million budget, sequel Death on the Nile didn't enjoy nearly the same success. On a monstrous $100 million budget, largely due to its greater reliance on visual effects, it grossed just $137.3 million, making it a surefire flop. However, context is key, and Death on the Nile was released in February 2022, when it had to deal with not only the ongoing impact of the pandemic, but also the negative PR of abuse allegations recently leveled against one of its stars. Given that older audiences have been especially slow to return to cinemas since the pandemic, and they're unquestionably one of the movie's prime demographics, it's easy to see why Nile performs so much worse than its predecessor. Even so, that's a disastrous return on investment, and many analysts initially assumed that it would spell the end for Branagh's film series. And yet, Disney evidently appreciated the many unfortunate factors working against it, and so decided to proceed with a third movie, A Haunting in Venice. It's been widely assumed that Nile performed well on streaming, likely contributing to Disney's decision to greenlight the threequel, albeit with a sensibly smaller $60 million budget and lesser reliance on visual effects. And the gamble mostly paid off. Venice grossed $122.3 million globally. Not an amazing result, but a decent enough return on its budget, especially when you factor in the presumably massive VOD revenue. Whether a fourth film happens or not, though, is entirely up in the air. Highlander. You'd certainly be forgiven for assuming that 1986's fantasy adventure film Highlander enjoyed a modest at worst performance at the box office, given that it spawned 4 sequels, 3 of which were released theatrically, as well as several TV shows and various comic books, novels, and other associated merch. But get this, not a single one of the 4 theatrical Highlander movies has been a box office success. Nope, not even the first. Despite being produced for a fair $19 million, the original netted just $12.8 million theatrically, but enjoyed considerably greater success on home video, where it quickly became a cult fave among genre fans. This led to a sequel 5 years later with the widely panned Highlander 2, The Quickening, which flopped yet didn't stop the producers from releasing 2 more theatrical sequels, both of which also flamed out commercially. One can only assume that these films do gangbusters business on home video and generate a ton of merch sales, because what other explanation could there possibly be for Highlander's bizarrely enduring existence? Terminator Salvation. It's painfully apparent that nobody's had a clear idea of what to do with the Terminator franchise for about 20 years. Yet the IP is also too precious and potential rich a commodity for the bean counters to can it outright. After James Cameron's original 2 movies became pop culture phenoms, 2003's third film grossed a not bad $433.4 million against a $187.3 million budget. 6 years later, Terminator Salvation was released, functioning as both a sequel to Terminator 3 and a soft reboot of the franchise, drafting in Christian Bale to portray a middle-aged John Connor, all while Arnold Schwarzenegger sat at the sidelines due to serving as governor of California. On an eye-watering $200 million price tag, Salvation made a disappointing $371.4 million, a mediocre figure attributed to both mixed reviews and Schwarzenegger's absence. Despite the film's failure causing the original production company to file for bankruptcy, the franchise was revived again after the rights were acquired by a different company, leading to the release of a 5th film, Terminator Genisys, in 2015. Against the odds and largely negative reviews, Genisys was a modest commercial success, grossing $440.6 million against a hemmed-in $158 million budget, aided by a massive overperformance in China, becoming the first Hollywood release to gross $100 million in the region. However, Genisys still failed to meet the studio's expectations, leading to a 6th film, Terminator Dark Fate, which operated as a direct sequel to Terminator 2 while ignoring the 3 prior movies. This one flopped brutally enough, just $261.1 million on a $196 million budget, that it might have actually finally killed the franchise off for good. Blade Runner. Blade Runner is unquestionably one of the most iconic sci-fi films of all time, enough that it it's easy to ignore that it was actually a commercial dud upon initial release. In 1982, Ridley Scott's indelible masterpiece netted just $41.6 million on a $30 million budget, seemingly ensuring that it would be a one-off romp. However, Blade Runner's esteem ballooned in the decades that followed it, in large part due to Scott releasing vastly superior new cuts of the film in both 1992 and 2007, cementing its status as a genre classic and major home video commodity. The movie's considerable fandom then emboldened Warner Brothers to greenlight a mega-budget $185 million sequel, Blade Runner 2049, which, despite receiving rave reviews and arguably being even better than the original film, flopped in 2017 with a $267.7 million final cue. It's fair to say that the studio vastly overestimated general audience appeal in the property, nostalgia for the original film, and star Ryan Gosling's ability to rouse casual interest in a cult franchise that lay dormant for 35 years. It's certainly a gift to the world that Blade Runner 2049 exists, but it's ridiculous that people paid to make decisions about vast sums of money thought that it was a sound investment. XXX State of the Union. 2002's gloriously dumb spy actioner XXX quite perfectly drifted off the success of The Fast and the Furious the year prior, its unpretentious brand of high-octane thrills filling a void created by the increasingly mouldy, goofy shenanigans of the James Bond franchise. The original film turned in an impressive $277.4 million against an $88.3 million budget, seemingly cementing Vin Diesel's burgeoning box office might. A sequel was quickly greenlit, yet Diesel ended up dropping out of the project due to scripting issues, resulting in his protagonist, Xander Cage, being killed off-screen and the film retooled as a star vehicle for new lead Ice Cube. The resulting slop, 2005's XXX State of the Union, grossed an embarrassing $71.1 million on a massive $113 million budget, barely 25% of what the first film made on a much higher price tag, no less. State of the Union's rejection by audiences seemingly killed the franchise. That is, until 2017, when Diesel, at the peak of his Fast and Furious fame, decided to return for threequel XXX Return of Xander Cage. Produced on a more sensible $85 million budget and leaning more overtly into the cartoonish action of Diesel's most famous franchise, it netted an impressive $346.1 million worldwide, almost as much as the first two films combined. Though a fourth film was quickly put into development, Diesel's ongoing work on the Fast franchise has kept it from coming to fruition so far. The Boondock Saints. No film on this list has as ugly a cost-to-profit ratio, theatrically speaking at least, as The Boondock Saints. The dark action thriller, produced for a seemingly sensible $6 million, ended up grossing just $30,471 upon limited release in the United States. To be clear, it clawed back a pitiful 0.005% of its production budget during its theatrical release. There were, however, majorly extenuating circumstances for this, given that The Boondock Saints was test screened just 2 weeks after 1999's Columbine High School massacre. With the distributor concerned that it might inspire copycat crimes, they decided to release the film in just 5 US cinemas, where it didn't stand a chance of turning a profit. But in the years that followed, The Boondock Saints enjoyed a prosperous second life on home video, where it generated more than $50 million in revenue, enough that a sequel was released in 2009, The Boondock Saints 2: All Saints Day. Though it didn't become a breakout box office hit itself, its $10.6 million total marked a huge leap from the first film, which, combined with presumably strong home video sales, made a still developing third film a genuine possibility. Hellboy. Guillermo del Toro's Hellboy wrung an enormous amount of production value out of its sensible $66 million budget. Yet despite its eye-popping visual design and Ron Perlman's charming central performance, it netted just $99.8 million globally, a frustrating hair short of $100 million. This made Hellboy an undeniable flop, and seemingly ensured that Del Toro's planned superhero franchise would hit an immediate stop. And yet, due to Hellboy performing extremely well on home video, Universal decided to pick up the rights to a sequel after Sony decided to walk away, presumably believing that said home video success would propel Hellboy 2 to box office dynamite. While Hellboy 2: The Golden Army certainly performed stronger than its predecessor, $168.3 million against an $85 million budget just wasn't good enough, causing Universal to hastily bin off any prospect of a third film, despite Del Toro and Perlman's concerted efforts to make it happen. A David Harbour-led reboot was then finally released in 2019, though only barely recouped its $50 million budget, leading to another reboot, Hellboy: The Crooked Man, The Chronicles of Riddick. Despite 2000's Pitch Black performing modestly at the box office, just barely doubling its $23 million budget, Universal became interested in developing a sequel following the success of Vin Diesel's The Fast and the Furious. In fact, Universal sweetened the deal by offering Diesel $11 million to star in The Chronicles of Riddick, granting him a producer credit and considerable creative control, and also giving the film a $120 million budget, more than 5 times that of the original. Universal was presumably extremely confident that Diesel's surging popularity would allow the larger-scale sequel to succeed, and yet The Chronicles of Riddick cratered commercially, ending with a total of just $115.8 million. Though this seemed to kill the franchise stone cold, in the years that followed, Diesel, who had since acquired the rights from Universal in exchange for making a cameo in The Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift, fought hard to get a third Riddick made. Ultimately, 2013's Riddick was produced because Diesel agreed to fund a large portion of the pared-down $38 million budget himself, even remortgaging his home and spending most of his own money to make it happen. On a more sensible budget, Riddick grossed a solid $98.3 million globally, proving successful enough that Diesel is currently developing a 4th film in the franchise, G.I. Joe: The Rise of Cobra. In 2009, G.I. Joe: The Rise of Cobra flopped at the box office, with the tentpole adaptation taking a mediocre $302.5 million against a hefty $175 million budget. However, with the film making almost half of its box office money domestically, ensuring greater profits for Paramount, and its release likely causing a surge in toy sales for Hasbro, the decision was made to proceed with the sequel regardless. In 2013, G.I. Joe: Retaliation was released, which attempted to re-energize its financial potential by adding both Dwayne franchise Viagra Johnson and Bruce Willis to the mix. With its slightly lower budget of $155 million and higher box office haul of $375.7 million, the gambit sort of paid off, even if it certainly wasn't the persuasive success Paramount was surely hoping for with Johnson involved. Development of a third film stalled for the better part of a decade, until a reboot, Snake Eyes, was finally released in 2021, which landed amid utter audience indifference, grossing a pathetic $40.1 million on a $110 million price tag. Yikes. And with Transformers: Rise of the Beast teasing a Transformers G.I. Joe crossover movie, Paramount and Hasbro may have finally conceded that G.I. Joe just can't become a breakout commercial hit on its own.